We just read Matthew 5, 42 to 48. Love your enemies. Famous passage. What I want to talk about this morning is how to change the world. Yeah, Brennan's like, whoa. Yes. I've been thinking a lot about what's going on in Minnesota. And I actually want to talk about this a little bit and how it relates to this passage. Okay? I'm talking specifically about Trump, about ICE, about the Renee Good killing. What I'm going to say today is not like, here's a political solution. But I want to think biblically about what's happening, and I want to help you think biblically, and I want you to think specifically through that question of how do you change the world, because what's happening in Minnesota and Minneapolis right now is a case study in conflicting answers on how you change this world. So on one side, what's wrong with the world? There's a group of people like immigrants. That's what's wrong with the world. And the answer is politics, power, strength. Okay? And on the other side, when you say what's wrong with this world, you have some people that might say bullies. Okay? And there's protest, resistance, there's compassion. The outcome of these two poles, perspectives, actually has resulted in conflict. It's resulted in killing. It's resulted in fractures and in division, and things are sitting there at a boiling point. And what I want to point out to you is that that tension, that friction, is actually surprisingly common throughout history. In other words, history doesn't seem to change. It seems to repeat itself. So what does it take to actually break that cycle and change the world in a positive direction? What's the Christian answer? Okay? Now listen, Christianity makes it very clear it's not anger. And it is really easy for both sides of the political spectrum to get angry here. James 1:20. I remember hearing this as a kid in the King James Version. The anger of man availeth little. Modern translations say the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. In other words, whatever the solution is, if you want to change the world, getting angry is guaranteed not to accomplish meaningful change. At its best, anger might focus you. It might give you a little bit stronger resolve to do the right thing, like to sacrifice. But usually what anger produces is either despair, disdain, or more unrighteousness. In other words, people feel powerless and so they give up, or they feel outraged and therefore justified in lashing out at people they despise. It repeats the cycle. So the very first thing we should say, Christianity is really clear. Anger is not going to change the world. Not going to solve things. So what is the Christian answer? And here I want to kind of frame this with something I heard from somebody else this week. There is a guy named James Tallarico who is young. He's a Democrat running for Senate here in Texas. And one of the interesting things is he's overtly Christian. He's actually studying to be a pastor. And much of what he says, I like. Okay? He has been interviewed by Joe Rogan, and there was a podcast following up with that this week, New York Times. Really interesting. You should go listen to it. But James Tallarico, he is overtly Christian in his politics. Very unusual. People are like, whoa. And one of the things that he says, and he says it explicitly, he's like, listen, the Christian answer to how things change is love. And he says, you don't have to be a Christian to get on board with that. And so I've been thinking a lot about love. All right? Is that how we change the world? Is that the message of Jesus? Is that the message of the early church? And I think the answer is yes, caveat. kind of, but not quite, and not far enough. So, Sermon on the Mount, most famous sermon ever preached. I want to talk about three things. I want to talk about love. I want to talk about life. I want to talk about resurrection, kind of hovering over this passage. And then I want to say, well, how do we change the world? All right? Because if you don't have an answer for how we change the world, you have nothing to offer anyone. All right? Paul says, always be prepared to give somebody the reason for the hope that you have when they ask. All right? So what's your hope? You should know. Okay? And you should actually know not just what's my hope, but what is the Christian answer. So, love, life, resurrection, and then we'll apply it. So first of all, love. This passage is pretty clear. Love your enemies. At first blush, this guy's answer, love, I think is a pretty good answer. You've got the Sermon on Mount in Matthew chapter 5. Love your neighbor. Love your enemies. Love those who love you. Love those who don't love you. Be like your Father in heaven. Love, 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 love. Another famous passage, John 3:16. For God so loved the world, gave his only Son. 1 Corinthians 13. It's the famous love passage. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love never ends. We've got these three things, faith, hope, love. Okay, but the greatest of these is love. We've got the Beatles. All you need is love. Okay, it settles it, right? Love is the answer. There's a couple of problems with that answer, and I just want to point them out so you can think Christianly, okay? Or at least know, how did the early Christians think? So here's the first thing. It is easy to get a broad consensus on that answer that all we need is love. Lots of people will agree with you, but for so much agreement, the world is still a very broken place. Which raises the question of, if that's the answer, it doesn't seem to be doing very much to change the world. The Beatles sang that song, what, 50 years ago? Actually more than that, probably 70 years ago. Okay? So that's the first observation. Second observation. When you actually look at the conflicts in this country, or the conflicts in the world, they are almost always driven by competing loves. Follow what I'm saying? Let me illustrate. Minnesota. On one side, you've got people who look at the world and the country. I'm doing broad brush generalization here. I know it. Okay? But I think it holds. There's a group of people in our country, probably let's call it 50%, 51, whatever it is. It's very close to a significant chunk. That says we're too soft, there's too many handouts, too many freeloaders, and what they love is actually strength, power, and maybe a nostalgic vision for the way the country used to be when everyone worked hard, earned their keep. America the brave. Okay? But here's my point. That vision is driven by a love of something, and we need to recognize that. Okay? Now here's the other side. There's some people who look at this world or this country and say, life is hard. Okay? And what they love is compassion and a safety net, and let's care for everybody, don't worry about what it costs, and maybe they have kind of a utopian vision of the future. But their vision derives from love too. So one of the problems when we say, all we need is love, it's like, well, which love? And what are we talking about for loves? You see what I'm saying? In other words, loves, competing loves, are actually behind a lot of the conflict that we see. So we can't just go, all we need is love. We've got to be more concrete and more specific than that. And this gets to the third kind of problem. When you look at the Bible, there is a much more nuanced view of love. Jesus actually says, love enemies. He says, pray for those who persecute you, right? In other words, don't shoot your enemies, but don't antagonize them either. And what I would say as I look at the news, I feel like I'm not seeing a lot of love for enemies on either side of the political equation. I see a lot of despising of enemies. John 3:16 says, God so loved the world that he what? He gave his only son. So the biblical version of love, whatever it is actually sacrificial in the direction of people you don't like and might even despise. Okay? And I definitely don't see a consensus on that on either side of the current conflict. Does that make sense? So that's why I don't think love goes far enough. It makes a great slogan, but it doesn't actually seem to solve or address the underlying problems, which themselves are built on loves, but they're competing loves. Okay, so let me give you one more example. Gospel of John, one of the four. Jesus makes 7 great... Mute yourself. There we go. Maybe.
Uh-oh.
I don't know how to mute her.
Just click on her icon and you can mute her.
No, I can't.
There we go.
Go.
Hang on. All right. There we go. You got it. Good job. Dramatic effect. Gospel of John. Jesus makes, like scholars have long seen this. The Gospel of John, Jesus makes 7 great statements about who he is and what he's about. He says, I am this. You know what they are? I'm the bread of life. I'm the light of the world. I'm the door and the gate. I'm the good shepherd. I'm the resurrection and the life. I'm the way, the truth, and the life. I'm the true vine. What he doesn't say in there, he doesn't say, I am love. Okay? Now, that's not saying that Jesus is not loving, okay? Or that he's not about love, but Jesus goes beyond it, and I think that you could argue Jesus is more about life than he is about love. John 10:10 says, I came that they might have life and have it abundantly. All right? So, let's talk about the second one. Love, life. I think this is a move in the right direction. I think both sides, let me say it this way. When you look at Minnesota and when you look at our current political kind of divide culturally, I'm going to say something that's probably controversial. I'm going to offend both sides here. I think both sides, I think everybody in America needs to be more pro-life. Now let me define what I mean by that. First of all, on the conservative side, I grew up very conservative, Montana, okay, red state. Conservatives are very pro-life, or at least they used to be. And I just want to observe that I am seeing many people cheering government actions in Minnesota. Those people largely on paper are pro-life. They are for protecting lives of the powerless, of unborn, okay? Those same people are shockingly callous to the taking of life, all right? Or the violence on lives when it comes to gays, liberals, and immigrants. So if somebody gravitates towards the conservative end of the spectrum, what I'd want to say is, dude, you need to be way more pro-life than you are. Now, what about the other side? The liberal progressive side tends to be very pro, poor, and powerless. Okay? The people who are protesting the deportations of the poor, powerless immigrants, I think that's a good thing. But those same people are shockingly callous in other areas of life to the lives of poor, powerless, unborn. Okay? or to ICE agents as human beings. Okay? In other words, let me say it this way. On the right, politically, I see a whole lot of hatred and venom, and that ought to trouble conservative Christians. And on the left, I see a whole lot of hatred and venom, and that ought to trouble liberal, progressive Christians. Okay? The Apostle Paul, as he was running into the blunt force trauma of Middle Eastern politics in a first century Roman Empire, somehow was winning people on both sides, okay, of the aisle. He was building relationships everywhere. He's talking with his guards, and his guards are asking him questions. And these are the people that like beat him, and somehow he knows how to engage them. And what I'm getting at here is I would suggest that the Apostle Paul was pro-life in every direction he found it. He didn't care who you were. He was interested in your life. You see what I'm saying? And that actually did something that we're not seeing on either side of the equation in our culture today. The early Christians, now listen to this, they weren't just pro-life, they were pro-laying down of lives, their own lives. And that's what Matthew 5 is talking about. It's not just love, it's love for your enemies. It's actually praying for those who persecute you, wishing for their blessing, pursuing their shalom. And we see very little of this in the current American economy. So I'm going to say American Christians, no matter which side they land on, we're not nearly pro-life enough. Okay? Pro-life of the people we don't like, and pro-laying down our lives. Yeah, question.
How much of that is actually just not just, but there's like a misdefinition of life. We think we know what what a good life looks like, and that's missing, right?
Yeah,
So like, I guess I'd just say like if I think about it in terms of loves,
yeah.
if I'm chasing the things that I think are good loves to give me life, I won't have any way to offer something.
Yep.
To someone that doesn't think that's good.
We need a different definition of the things we love. I think that, listen, let's just be candid. You guys, this is not going to surprise you. I think American Christians are way too American on all fronts. And we need to have our loves, okay, and our lives and the laying down of our lives shaped more by Scripture than by the culture we naturally affiliate with. All right? In Mark 8:35, Jesus says, this is a famous passage, if you seek to save your life and hold on to it, you're going to lose it. But if you lose your life for my sake of the gospel, you'll actually find it. The early Christians experienced a different quality of life. Most Christians in America, the quality of life that we experience doesn't really look very different from people who don't profess faith. We're anxious about the same things. We spend our money chasing the same things. Okay? We might have different definitions of like what a good life is going to be, but really we are very consumeristic on both sides of the aisles. And Jesus fundamentally, as he's talking about love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you, lay down your life, learn how to die. That is something none of us are very good about. Okay? So love, life, we need to be pro-life. I think that moves us in a better direction. But I actually think the early Christians went further, all right? And I want to talk about resurrection. Now we're getting to the heart of what early Christianity and Jesus are really about. Acts chapter 2. Do you remember this? When Peter preaches his first sermon and everybody is cut to the heart and they say, what must we do to be saved? Do you know what Peter says? He doesn't say, what'd you say? Yeah, he said, you crucified him. He doesn't say what you need is love. He actually says what you need to do is repent and believe and be baptized, okay, in the name of Jesus Christ for the forgiveness of your sins. And he said, this is the Jesus that the Jesus that you killed, God raised. He actually offers them resurrection. And what happens in Acts chapter 2? A new kind of community comes to life. Romans chapter 1. Jesus is declared to be the Son of God in power, not by angels, like Hark the Herald Angels Sing, by his resurrection. 1 Corinthians 13. Paul preaches love, 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 right? That's not the end of 1 Corinthians. You know what the end is? 1 Corinthians 15, which is all about resurrection. If the dead are not raised, your faith is in vain. Okay? Colossians 2 and 3. Since you have been raised with Christ. Here's my point. The entire New Testament, if you actually read the text, you're going to say, does it talk about love? Absolutely, but it goes much further, pushing in the direction of life. You need to lay down your life, and it says the only way you can do what we really need is resurrection. Okay?
I'm just feeling really convicted that love is the conduit to resurrection.
Love is a conduit to resurrection. I would actually say it the other way around. Resurrection is a conduit to love. But hold that thought and follow it, and let's test it out. Okay? Over and over, the center of Christianity in the New Testament and in the early church was not love, it was not life, it was resurrection, breaking in here and now. And what that does for followers who get in on it, it enables you to love even your enemies, even persecutors, so you can lay down your life and you can pour yourself out for others because you're actually getting life as you do that. You're experiencing resurrection. So you can love and pour yourself out, not just for friends, not just for family, not just yourself, but for strangers, foreigners, and enemies. And that, I would say, is singular and unique among all religions. I do not know of another religion that is saying what this world needs to change is resurrection, and it's happening. Okay? Now, so those are my 3 points. Love's good, life's better, resurrection's really where it's at. That's what's going to change the world. So now let's come back to that original question and apply it. And I want you to think, okay, how do you change the world? Let's apply what we're learning. You ready? Here's the answer. You can't. Okay? Listen. Absolutely nothing that you do, whether it's activism or apathy, is going to have any significant impact on what's going on in Minnesota or what's going on in the government or politics in general, let alone the world. But, okay, I am not, please hear this, I'm not saying that you shouldn't care, that you shouldn't read the news, that you shouldn't be involved, that you shouldn't be talking to your politicians, okay? I'm not saying the world isn't going to change. I think it is. Change is coming, but Jesus is the one doing it. And it's already underway. So what am I saying? Here's the principle. Okay? How do you change the world? Not just love, not just life. Learning to lay down your life. Do you see how counterintuitive that is? If you actually give up your life, you're going to find your life. What if you took that principle and you started saying, how might that apply in my living? For instance, okay, in my life, instead of seeking to be strong and in control of the situation, what if I choose to be weak, to trust, and to be dependent on Jesus? Okay? What if instead of seeking to impose my views on others, do you see how that's going on globally? Everybody's trying to impose their views on others. What if we said, you know what? I'm really going to focus on having my views reshaped by Jesus. Okay? In other words, do you see what I'm saying? I'm not going to try to change the world. I am just going to try to, Jesus, would you please just start changing my views? What if, instead of being proud and saying, hey, I know the answers, I know how things are going to run better, we say, I don't have a clue. Humble. So you know what? I have got a lot to learn. I need to make myself a student. I need to make myself a student of history. I need to make myself a student of others who see the world differently than me. But I also need to make myself a student of Scripture and of Jesus. Okay? What if instead of saying, I'm going to achieve my vision at whatever the cost, okay? And here's what I mean by that. You're at work, you want a raise, you want to get a promotion. There's all these other people that want the same raise, same promotion. So what we usually do is we start going, let me, like nudge the boss and remind the boss why I'm the best, I deserve it. I'm going to point out the things that I do well. I'm going to say, by the way, I feel like I deserve a raise here. And I'm going to point out how other people maybe don't do as well. Like Nick, I don't know if you noticed, but Nick shows up late. Okay? And Jay doesn't work as hard. Okay, do you see what I'm saying? We constantly try to elevate ourselves at the expense of others so that we get the agenda that we want. And what I'm saying is, let me say it another way. What if when you look at the problems of the world, instead of saying, okay, how do we change the world? I actually said, how am I going to be local and how am I going to change my world? How am I going to change me in my world? And how am I going to do that? Not by using the world's means of saying, I'm right, I've got the plan, my agenda, okay, should be in force. It should run this way. If we said instead, I'm really small. I'm probably wrong about a lot of stuff. I need to make myself humble. I need to make myself a servant. I need to sit at the feet of Jesus. I need to serve at the feet of others. Okay? And what I'm going to start doing is I am going to start looking how to live differently, how to not just pursue love, but how to pursue life, how to pursue the laying down of my life, sacrificing for Jesus and sacrificing for others, whoever God brings into my sphere right now, right here. Okay? So how do you change the world? The answer is you don't. You're not. But how do you change your world? And the answer is you can. But it's hyper-local, and it starts with you. And you start saying, anyone you meet, everyone you come in contact with, Jesus, why have you placed me here? Okay, why have you put them here in my orbit? How can I serve? How can I love? How can I bless? How can I seek their shalom? And what I'm here to tell you is that's actually what's going on with these girls in our lives right now. And what will change the world is when we have a significant number of Christians starting to do this hyper-local practice right here in our neighborhoods. Go, you know what? I don't know how to pursue justice out there. But what does it look like to pursue justice with every relationship that I'm in? What does it look like to pursue mercy with every relationship that I'm in? What does it look like to seek to help every relationship that I'm in? Do you see what I'm getting at? The early Christians started doing that. And because that required laying down their lives, what they actually experienced was the power of resurrection. They started experiencing Jesus's life in them. And that was so different and so unique and so compelling that everybody around them said, excuse me, could you tell me what's going on? Because I'm not used to seeing things like this. So I think that the Christian answer is if we want to learn to change the world, and you really want to live, you need to learn to die. And you need to learn to follow Jesus, and you have got to experience resurrection. And I realize there are going to be so many people that don't buy that. That's totally fine. But how do I start to buy that? I'm suggesting that if you can do that, pursue it, not just love, not just life, but laying down your life for Jesus, for the gospel. You're actually going to find your life, and you're going to see your world start to change, and you're actually going to have an impact. And that impact, if it's manifested in enough people's lives, will start to change the world. But Jesus is the one who's really changing it. Okay? The world says if you do that, if you actually lay your life down and spend yourself that way, you're crazy. It'll be the end of you. And Jesus says, unless you do that, you'll never experience the beginning. All right? Jesus says the only way is by learning to do this, because this is what he does. And as we do it, we start to fellowship with Jesus. We have union with him. And we start to experience the life that he is brimming over with. So he's going to change the world, but we can get in on it by learning how to change our world, beginning with us. Two things, and I'm going to end. We're done early. Okay? We'll give you, you got a question?
I had a question, I'm thinking about this because I've got these girls, and they're in the back right now. It's a hard day. But you've been living this for 30, 40 years. Where do you start if you're 18? Like, where do you even start to believe in the resurrection?
Man.
How do you, because if you're talking about this, like 5, 10 steps down the road of already experiencing the resurrection, where do you start?
So here's the first thing you do. You start by recognizing the vanity of the world's ways. Guys, what you post on Facebook will not change the world. Your social media influence and what your friends think of you will have zero impact on, so starting to be disillusioned with the world's ways of doing things, I think that's the first one. And starting to be reformed, which means you're going to have to read, you're going to have to pray, and you're going to have to start asking and going like, Lord, would you do this in me? And then you have to be prepared. It's going to be a long road. Let me give you 2 quotes. Martin Luther, you know the Lord's Prayer? Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Luther's like, when you pray the Lord's Prayer, okay, he's not like waiting for you to pray the Lord's Prayer in order to bring his kingdom. He's like, Jesus is bringing his kingdom whether you pray that or not. So what you're really praying when you pray the Lord's Prayer, thy kingdom come, Martin Luther says, you're praying thy kingdom come in me. And most people, when we say the Lord's Prayer, we're not thinking that. We're thinking Nick needs it, or Jay, you know what I'm saying? We're thinking like somebody else needs this kingdom thing. And Martin Luther says, start with yourself. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, I just want to leave you this. And then if anybody's got questions, we can. Hebrews chapter 12. Remember this passage? Therefore, since we're surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which clings so closely. Let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and finisher or perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of God. You have got to fall in love with Jesus. And you got to believe that Jesus is more than just theology or an answer or a ticket to heaven. You got to believe that Jesus is alive, that he's speaking, that he's doing something in your life. And you have to start being willing to look at your life. Most people move through their lives and they don't expect to see God doing anything. They think he does it in church and they think he'll do it in the future. And when you start looking through your life saying, hey, what if God is trying to do something right now? You're going to meet somebody and you're going to be like, I have no idea what he might be doing, but I'm going to try to pour myself out for him. And guess what's going to happen? You are going to start to meet people and make friendships and make a difference in other people's life. And you are going to experience joy. And it's that joy that's going to lead you closer to Jesus and further into sacrifice. And that's exactly what we are already experiencing with these little girls. And it's like, man, is this going to be a hard road and full of suffering? You bet. But what is allowing, I've had several people who are like, how are you doing this? And I'm like, actually, it's Malachi and Jordan. I'm just like running interference and like getting legal stuff in order and trying to raise money. But how do you do this? The answer is, you actually really believe in the resurrection. and you start to get a taste of the resurrection, and you go, this trumps everything, and this is worth it, and I will spend myself to the last drop if this is what Jesus wants me to do. That's what we've got to start doing as a church, but it's not going to happen until we start to experience it as individuals. Okay, any questions, comments, thoughts?